Let's think about Moses for a moment. Whatever he thought his duty was, it suddenly ended in the incident of the rock. Now, I'm of two minds about that because, on one hand, having this graphic comic book about the Bible that I've mentioned many times, it gives us the behind the scenes of what happens in the Bible. I didn't look it up for today because it's in a container. I think it's somewhere on the Atlantic Ocean right now. But I can imagine Moses going to with his handlers. He has a round table of handlers. They go to God and he says, "Look, I'm done. I don't know how to get out of this, but I've been there for 120 years and I think someone else needs to take over. I'm losing it." And they say, "Okay, we got to figure out a cover story. You got to do something. You just can't get old and die. There has to be some kind of event." So they construct this event. It's not great, but it's okay. And one of the angels says, "No one's going to believe it. They're going to be mad about this story forever." And someone says, "You know what? They're always mad anyway. Who cares? Let's just do this thing. Let's get this thing done. And Moshe, you can retire for a while and we'll move this thing." So sometimes when I look at this and it doesn't make sense, I say to myself, because it's not that well done. And we're not supposed to believe it anyway. And there's something else behind the scenes. Whenever something doesn't sound right, it might not just sound right. So in any case, whatever it is, whether Moses lost his temper again, uh, whether he's just had it, his sister just died, and all they can think about is their needs. All they can think about is they want to go back to Egypt. And I've mentioned this before, and Moses looks and says, "My sister just died." And all you can think about is yourselves. You can't give me even a little bit of a break. You can't say it in a different way. You can't pile on complaint after complaint after complaint. You can't let me just mourn a little bit here. And I can imagine Moses saying to himself, this is another version, I really am just done with this. And I need to do something symbolically that God will see that I'm done. And then again, in my more cynical reading of it, God says something that sounds, you didn't sanctify me in front of the people. In my mind, Moses is going, yeah, whatever. Just fire me. I want to get out of this. And then Moses, of course, finds himself with another duty. And I think these are very profound duties. One duty is he has to bury his brother. Now, his sister just died. And now the question is realization, we're the generation of the desert. We were included in this. They didn't think they were because they didn't rebel. Caleb wasn't included. Joshua wasn't included. But for whatever reason, Miriam and Aaron were included. And of course, now Moses is included. So now I think of this next moment in Moses's life as he buries his brother, which he knew was coming. Um, they're both well over 100 years old. Aaron is older than Moses, and at that point, people know they have a lot less time ahead of them than they had before them. But still, he has a lifetime to review. All the way back to his growing up in the palace and meeting with his family, his brother, when he came out of the palace, and their virtually their entire life together since he went back to Egypt to help liberate the Israelites. I think that's happening with him. He is told that he will not see the land, so he's now has the duty of changing his understanding of himself, as just been mentioned. And then he has the duty to set up a transition of power, meaning the main thing he has to do is invest people with the trust of Joshua and not doubt Joshua's leadership. So there's a great deal that Moses has to do to end his life well, including becoming the master orator. The rabbis speak many times about the book of Deuteronomy. Ele hadvarim. These are the words that Moses spoke. So the book of Deuteronomy actually has a bit of a different status from Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. Because the book of Deuteronomy is overtly spoken by Moses. In fact, it's so overtly spoken by Moses that in the traditional understanding of Revelation, it has the lower status of revelation. It's not pure speech of God. It's clearly closer to my understanding of Revelation. Is the divine spirit being refracted through a human being. We also find soon in the book of Deuteronomy some of the greatest poetry in the Bible. Just as the Song at the Sea is Moses singing it, certainly the outstanding poem in the Bible. And then in Ha'azinu, we have another great poem in the Bible. So here we see Moses, again, transcending the disability with which he was born and moving into this new time. As I wrote in my Shabbat thought, as I stand back from this, for me, it looks like a swirling dream. Typically, I have focused on one thing or another to speak about. I spoke many years about the Chukat, the strange ritual, the taint of death, really understanding. He's surrounded by death. An entire generation has died. I think from a literary perspective, whoever constructed the Bible and those who delineated this Torah portion, it was like an overture. The overture of this Torah portion is a ritual of death, because then we see the two of the great leaders die, one sentenced to death, and then the people enter into war, that which they've terribly feared, clearly suffering death and killing other people in war. So therefore, the mystery of the para aduma, of the red heifer, how the taint of death is reversed through this ritual, I actually think is a bit of a distraction. In my opinion, all the years that I spent unpacking, which I think were years well spent, because it really is an exercise in symbolic anthropology. Meaning, how do you take a ritual and in this ritual, remove the taint of death from the subject of the ritual, but then the person performing the ritual absorbs the taint of death. The rabbis found this very mysterious, but when you study the transactional analysis of symbolic anthropology, you might say energy is never destroyed, it's only moved. So if one removes the taint of death from another, one then takes on the taint of death. Now, so I work that through from a symbolic anthropological level. I step back, and I see it more from a literary level. It's a way of introducing the chukah, the decree that we all die. Miriam will die, Aaron will die, Moses will die, and eventually we all die. I look a little bit further into this, you might say, chukat, meaning the overture on death, the decree of death for each of us, and see it as its own motif. If we look at the very first lines of the Torah portion, it says, Zot hachukah ki yamut ha'adam. This is the law when a man dies. But if you just take the first few lines, it says, this is the law because people die. Just think about that for a moment. This is the law because people die. Now, in my experience as a clergy person, one of the things I dreaded the most as a young rabbi was the actual moment when I would walk into a home where someone had just died. None of us feel prepared for the moment. You know, we learn the halacha, someone tells us what to do. None of us feel adequate to the task. Even the first funeral at which I officiated was for me something I had to transcend a part of myself. You know, would it actually for me, this 26-year-old young man, be the person to come for a family and the one who says, I will help escort your beloved mother's path as her soul goes on her journey back to the divine. Now, the first time I actually did get a phone call in the middle of the night and said, my husband just died. And I said, I'll be right there. I remember driving over. I know what the law is, but I think what I'm doing is saying, the tradition saying, we have this. Because of course, when a person wakes up and their spouse is deceased, their great question is, what do I do? And people are numb and shocked and feeling a great sense of despair and catastrophe. And then a representative of the tradition comes in and says, you sit down, I've got this handled. I know exactly what to do. And for the tradition to say, when a person dies, here's what happens. And they're interested in this world of tameh and tahor, the world of pure and impure. But I think that is a projection of what we human beings experience, with the idea of this is the law when people die because people die. I think it's a deep message to us. We're all going to die. So what is our law? What is our law? What law should we live by? Where in time, at a certain time, all of the things that we have poured so much energy into are going to look completely insignificant. In fact, the rabbis say, if you truly want to do teshuvah, go to the moment of your death, look backwards on your life, and make your decisions from the moment of your death. How would you live your life differently if you realize it's all going to resolve in that moment? How fixed, obsessed, angry, upset, fearful would you be if you look back at it and said, here I am dying. Let me look at my entire history of decisions and make them from this perspective. And so there's a part of the Midrashic tradition that says the reason Chukat is, one reason Chukat is here, says this is the law because people die. It reminds us for a little bit to stay in this position, to stay in the ritual of Chukat, to stay in this ritual that there's going to be the taint of death. We are, as it were, tainted, traumatized by the death of others. And one day people will be tainted and traumatized by our deaths. And if we could live with a consciousness that, we're life is done with us far beyond we're done with life, as I've said a few times, that it all looks different. Now, I remember when I first read that many, many years ago as a rabbinical student, I actually practiced that as a meditation. It sounds a little bit morbid, but I had to imagine myself in my coffin. I had seen enough people in coffins that I knew what it looked like. And I tried to imagine myself alive in my coffin, standing up, looking at the past vista of my life and saying, okay, I'm ready, put me in the ground. And in that meditation of standing in an upright coffin, looking back at my life, and my duty, my challenge at that point was to enumerate all the things I should have done differently. I felt that was my duty, standing in my coffin, looking back at my life. With the wisdom I have now, do I have enough courage to come up with the regret, to identify all the things I would have done differently, and really absorb them and crystallize them, and then have the event of death be like a mikvah, be like Yom Kippur. Now that I've confessed them, they come up, you might say, to the surface of my being. And just as Yom Kippur washes our sins away, washes our regretful deeds away, because we brought them up to the surface through confession, and Yom Kippur washes them off of us, I see death as a kind of a great mikvah, a kind of a great purification, a great Yom Kippur. We simply have to bring everything to the surface. Try to imagine as we're lifted up to the divine, we go through the portal, the cleansing experience of death, all of the negativity is washed off of us, like when they wash the body. It's all washed off of us, and we are lifted to the divine as a neshama tohora, as a pure soul. Now, ever since I began engaging in these meditations, it sounds odd, but I have found the meditation on my death to be a very deep and releasing meditation. I'm just going to accept it. But I want to use the fact of my death, my whenever it will be, and God may it be many years from now, but the fact of my death as a tool to live my life better in the present and see myself going to a moment where I will be going through this cleansing ritual. And hopefully, as I go toward that moment, I will have already begun the confession, regret, and cleansing far before I arrive at that moment. So when I arrive at that moment, and I hope I'm conscious. I hope I'm able to lie there and say, "You got 10 minutes. Whatever you need to say it now." To look back at my life, and I said, "I think I've said most of it. I'm ready. I've had this gift of life. I've made mistakes. I've cleansed myself. I've tried to get it right, not holding anything back. I'm ready to be lifted up and go through the cleansing portal of the experience of death as we're lifted into the divine." So in this swirling dream of this Torah portion that begins with the overture, that this is the Torah. People die. And now what happens when Miriam dies? Well, they're all traumatized. They don't know what to do with her death. They don't know what to do with their failure. And as has been said before, I'm a little bit tired of these people. But on the other hand, I know that when people suffer deep loss, trauma regresses them. So I look at them and I say, you've been hurt. You're not ready for this. You really didn't think that Miriam was going to die. You didn't really think that Aaron was going to die, right? You treated them as if they would live forever. But now you know they don't. So because I try to look at the text from a social psychological perspective, I look at their complaining as a way of their not being able to live with their own shame and guilt on how they treated Miriam and Moses and Aaron, and looking at their faults. They had to go, they were traumatized. When people experience trauma, if they don't work it through, they regress. They regress to their parents' behaviors. You know, the behavior of the parents are instilled into the children. Children don't want to be like their parents in any way, but unless they work it through, it will, you know, recrudesce up into their lives as well. So I'm looking at that and saying, well, that's true. That is exactly what happens when people have experienced loss. That's exactly what happens when people are traumatized. With Moshe, well, that's exactly what happens when people are just done with whatever's going on around them. I even look at the story of the fiery snakes that I wrote a long semi-humorous fugue on in my Shabbat thought. You know, that they're complaining about the rotten food, and again, I imagine the backroom thing where they say, what do we do with these people focusing on the rotten food? God says, I have an idea. You know that snake back in Eden? Let me whip that back out and just sick it on these people and watch how that changes their focus of attention. The one way to change someone's mind is face them with impending death. So the snakes are after them. Suddenly, the food doesn't taste that bad. Suddenly, they're not fixated on going back to Egypt. The more I study this parsha, the brilliance of the scenes come to the fore one by one. And then the brilliance of the rabbis of delineating this parsha into one Torah portion. You know, there are several little minor gems, works of art, and the rabbis chose the Torah portion. The rabbis put it in a frame. You know, the overture, these different scenes, and of course, this wonderful end is we're ready to face our deaths. We're ready to fight to go back into our homeland. It's going to be tough, and we're resolved. We're going to enter back into that land. So we always like to say, well, what does this have to do with me? How does this change me? Well, first of all, I want to introduce to you, I hope you don't find it too morbid, the meditation on the day of your death, of looking back at your entire life and what you would have done differently, knowing it's all going to come to an end. And what is the most important things in your life in retrospect, and what should you have done and not done based on what you know to be most deeply important. Now, from that perspective, we all face regret, but we all face the miracle, as it were, of arriving to a moment where we are able to regret, to live long enough to be able to regret and to purify ourselves through a confession, and then hopefully and end our lives with something of a song at our lips. Tomorrow, I want to go into some of the deeper spiritual psychological aspects of these wonderful stories. But tonight, Shabbat Shalom to all of you. I wanted to give you just a little sense of the really deep, profound, literary, spiritual, psychological, poetic dimensions of this of this strange text that looks just disjointed, but for me, it has the integrity of an incredible dream. All right, thank you, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. It's great seeing you. So I can call out a few. Rabbi Manning, great to see you. Shanti, thanks for the poem. Roland, hey, Claudia, wonderful to see you. Israel and Nancy. Let's see, Allison and Andy, Shabbat Shalom. Hey, Richard. Hey, Roberta, great to see you. Deirdre. Let's see, Adele. Gwen. Yeah, we saw on your Facebook, you're going to be doing some performing coming up soon. Yeah, you can tell everybody about it in the chat if you want. Let's see. Hold on. Excuse me. I'm going to get my spectacles on a little bit closer. Okay. Hey, Todd and everybody else. It's very hard for me to see, believe it or not. My screen is so far away, I actually can't make out the names. I don't have a giant screen anymore. It's a little screen in front of me. Uh, anyway, so wonderful to see you. You know, when I got up at 4:15 this morning, getting ready, I thought to myself, I'm really excited to see everybody. So I'm going to tell you that that just having this moment pulls me out of bed, and you know, I reassembled the thoughts I put together last night, and have this wonderful opportunity to share with you, hear a great teaching, hear a wonderful poem, and see a lovely group of lovely people.